holding today, second half of the Maimer Keser and Re'ena. We are now on Chaf Beis, starting Chaf Beis Amud Aleph, top of the page. And in the Maimer we learned, the Maskell was, Se'eno Re'ena b'nai Tzion, go out and see daughters of Tzion, in the king Shlomo, and the crown that he was crowned with by his mother, on the day of his wedding. So we learned that the idea of the Atara, the crown, is that the Jewish people themselves are the ones that are crowning HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore he doesn't let them go until he calls them my mother. And so, as we learned in Perek Gimel of this Maimer, that before that we, so to speak, draw down godliness into, and first he spoke about into Keser, into the level of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but then he also says that through Torah mitzvahs we draw down into all 10 koiches, that we make bechinas Adam, that the level of man, so to speak, and we do that through all the different hamshachas that we do through the way we fulfill Torah and mitzvahs and stay away from avedas, and through that we bring it into the full person. So now he says Dalid. He says above the person there's also the crown. So now he's going back to explain what's the crown that's even higher than the level of Adam. He says what? Now, the crown that he was crowned by his mother, this is the level of the crown, is the level of the Keser, of kingship, which is even higher than the body of the king. As it says in Etzchaim Shachov Beis, Seif Perek Vav, that the crown is not part of the body, it's beyond the body. And this is, for example, that when a king is crowned with great, beautiful stones, even though the stones are inanimate things, yet, because they're beautiful and good, you make a crown on the head with them. In the same way, through the letters of Torah, which we know letters are called daimim, they are inanimate, so to speak, things, which they are enclosed within the physicality of the world in the trumas and maestras and the different mitzvahs in the physical world. So through these things, there becomes this crown above. And you just look at the Maimon, Chanukah, mitzvah nicham mismoil. And then he says, the idea here is that our Chacham taught us at the time that the Jewish people received the Torah. Before that, they said, Na'asa ונשמע, we will do and we will listen. So the Alter is now going to explain. The explanation of this is that the explanation, the meaning of the word nishma, to listen, means that you should be totally nullified to the words of Torah that's speaking through your mouth, which is a desire and the wisdom of the Eibishter, as if you're hearing and listening to the Shekhinah that is talking through your own throat. As it says in the Tehillim, Tana Shoni Rasacha, that my tongue should repeat your words, and that's what it says, make heard to your ears that which you are taking and bringing out from your mouth. And here the Alter Rebbe says Ata is the level of Ata, who, which I think it's a reference to the Eibishter, who is Ata hu Machaya, Ata Machayas Kulam, that the level of Ata, the Eibishter, so to speak, which is the letters from Aleph to Taf, with the Heimetzah Sapaz, explained in Shayichud Ve'amunah, or as we say, Baruch Ata, you, Eibishter, that this is what's coming through your mouth, what you're being moitzi mipicha, so you should listen to this. Now, even before they said nishma, which is the level of being bottled to the words of Torah that are coming through you, he said nasa. That means that you should also be nullified, you should first be nullified to the master of the desire, meaning the one who the desire is his. So not just nullified to the desire, but to the one who has the desire, which that is like the Ein Sof Baruch Hu by itself. That through this bitul, through its nullification, you draw down the level of nishma. In other words, you draw down from above to below, because we know that one spirit will arouse another and draw it down. And that's what our Chacham say. Anybody who says, I only have Torah, we say, even Torah he doesn't have. Why? Because the Torah does not belong to him. It's not connected to him. It's not his. And it doesn't get drawn down from the light of the Ein Sof Baruch Hu only through the first having nullification of your own desire, completely to Hashem, only to Hashem, to be totally nullified and included and infused within the light of the Ein Sof Baruch Hu Mamash. And he says that this nullification of desire at the level of Nasa and at the level of Nishma, which is a nullification, as we said before, to the Bala Ratzin, as well as to the Eibishter that is speaking through the wisdom of Hashem that's speaking through your mouth, which is the Ratzin of the Eibishter, they're called crowns. And look in the Maimer, Kimcha Mekarchaim, etc. In the same way above, it's also what is called the crown. That's the level of the nullification of the Eibusher's Ratzon, so to speak, that he nullifies his Ratzon, that is blessed, which has no end and has no purpose. In other words, there's no limits to it, that it should become, that he should have a desire in Torah, a desire in mitzvahs, which he is so exalted from those, even from this desire, as we say in Tzedakah, Matitaloi, even if you'll do all the righteousness, what will you give him? Only this desire of the Eibusher that comes down into Torah and mitzvahs is a total kindness and a charity, a tzedakah, that the Eibusher is doing for us, and that is what it says, answer, your tongue should answer my words, and as the pasuk continues, because all your mitzvahs are righteous. In other words, the whole drawing down of Torah and mitzvahs is a righteousness of the Eibusher. It's all tzedakah. And that is also why all the mitzvahs are called with the name tzedakah, as it says, Tzedakah tiyalanu, that tzedakah will be for us, because we will guard to do all the mitzvahs. This entire mitzvah, meaning that all the mitzvahs are considered a tzedakah and a kindness, which the Eibusher draws down him through it. His supernal desire, which has no end and has no limits, and the one that causes that this gets drawn down the way that the Eibusher nullifies his desire, to draw himself down in a desire of Torah mitzvahs to us. So who causes this tzedakah and chesed? That is the involvement in Torah, with a total nullification to the desire of Hashem, as we said, the words that you've placed in my mouth. And even though we said before that the Torah is the level of man, which the level of man, as it says, Torah comes from the level of Chachma. So Torah is the level of man. Now we're saying it's a crown, but it's even higher than the body of man, so to speak, the form of man. He says, yet, that is the way it just comes out from its hidden state to a revealed state. But its source and its foundation in a supernal level from where it's taken, on that it says, in midbar matana, the Torah comes from a gift of the midbar, of the desert. Which what's the level of a desert? That's a much higher level, higher than the level of Adam, than man. Why? Because by a desert it says, that no man has passed through it, and no man has settled there. Because the level of Ish is what it says in the pasuk, Hashem Ish Mechama, or it says Mechama L'Hashem Ba'amalek, but both of those verses, the word name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is used, meaning, where do we have the level of Ish Mechama, or Mechama L'Hashem? It's all in these levels where there's Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, which that is once the godliness is already revealed in a way of Hashem's name, after it's already drawn down through saying Kaddish 3 times, or with a vav, meaning it's drawn down through the level of Kaddish, as he said in Perek Beis of the Maimer. But in its source and in its foundation, the light of the Ein Sof Baruch Hu, Mamish, there the Torah is called a midbar, which no man has passed and no man has settled, because it's much higher than the level of Adam. And from there it gets drawn down to come down as a crown on the head and on the intellect, which is actually much higher than the head and the intellect, and that's why it's called the crown. And so this crown is also accomplished through the Jewish people. So now he goes back to explain the pasuk, and this is what it means, that you should go out and see daughters of Tzion and the king of Shlomo, because the idea of the king Shlomo, that is the king, that the shalom is his, meaning peace is his. What does that mean? You bring peace from two extreme places and bring them together, it's called shalom. And as it says, Shlomo with a hey, what's the added hey here? Is that, in other words, to draw down the light of the Ein Sof, that's as his name is, that it has no end, to bring a life to the worlds and creations, which are totally limited, which are two complete opposites. So this has to be a drawing down from a complete opposite to a complete opposite. And so what it connects and what draws us down and makes us peace to connect these two opposites is the idea of kingship. As it says, your kingship is the kingship of all the worlds, and as we say, Yachid Chehoilo Melech, that you alone, Hashem, as you are alone. There's a life force, a little bit of the life force is Melech. In other words, the Melech is intermediary. In other words, that you, yourself, Hashem, you are totally one and unique. Only that the life of the whole world is from the level of Melech, which is your original thought that I want to be king. And this is what it means, the king, that the shalom is his, because he brings peace between these extremes. So now, what does it add when you add the letter hey, as we said earlier, that the hey, that the shalom gets drawn down to the lowest level of the hey, which is the giving life to all creations and creating them from nothing into something and bringing them from their concealed state to a revealed state and from the potential state to a real state. And so who causes this peace? And who causes this combination to bring this all together? That is through the crown, that he was crowned by his mother, which we said before, the mother here meaning Malchus, the level of the Jewish people, Knesset Yisrael, that accomplishes this. As we said, that it's all dependent on Isarusa de Lasata, on an arousal from below. That means our avodah down here. So now he says, so that's what it's dependent on. Our mitzvahs down here, Torah mitzvahs down here in this world, and bitul in this world. And so now he's going to say that the neshama says they are in Gan Eden, that those that are called daughters of Yerushalayim, that those are called daughters of Tzion. Daughters of Yerushalayim, those are the neshama that we have not yet come down into a body of people that they can receive a complete fear of God. In other words, a total fear that is a level of total unlimitedness, which even the angels, the supernal angels, are not able to receive, as it says, that each one of them gets in their own measurement. And if it changes, so to speak, a little bit over their midah, as it says, he puts his little finger amongst them, and they all burn. In other words, they'll become totally nullified in their existence because he puts his little finger amongst them. In other words, it's a little bit more revelation than their norm, which they're set for them. Why? Because they're actually, the angels are in a so to speak, in physical bodies. It doesn't say physical, but they're in bodies that are made of the two elements of fire and wind. As it says that he makes his angels, luchais, misharsav, his servants, eshalayt, like burning fire. So we see there's two elements. But the neshamas that have not then, but the neshamas that have not yet come down into bodies, they're able to receive the light of the Ein Sof, as it is in a level of Ein Sof, as it says, that I stood before God, because they are totally included and one within their emanator, and therefore they're able to receive even greater than the angels. That's the level of Bnei Yerushalayim. Then we have the level of Bnei Tzion, which they are called the neshamas that are in Gan Eden. That they come from Olam Haz, they've come from this physical world. Because the word Tzion here is from the word of the same term of garments, as we find that it's a Talmidei Chachamim, the scholars of Bavel, Mitzuyanim, that they have to be dressed in an outstanding way. That's what the Gemara says. It's with regard to their clothing. In other words, that from their garments that they have, garments from their learning of an involvement of Torah and mitzvahs, as it says, lucky is the one who has come here to the world to come, and his study is in his hands. In other words, to be able to receive pleasure from the ray of the Shekhinah, which you're not able to look at in this great light without a vessel. Therefore, you need these garments to be vessels to receive the godly light in Gan Eden. And therefore, all the prophets, even Moshe Rabbeinu, he saw only through a glass, aspaklaria, some type of lens. Only that Moshe Rabbeinu saw with one lens, which was a direct lens, and all the other prophets saw through 7 lenses. And that's what it says in the pasuk, that days are created. It says, and in other words, and beyond them is really the pshat if you say loy. But on the other hand, we say villoy with a vav. We read it with a vav because we're going to find God within the days. Why? Because these days are garments, and they were created and formed. In other words, that we should be able, that the level of echad should shine within them. But this garment is only to have these garments that we need for Gan Eden are only to have a pleasure and to receive the light of the Shekhinah, which in other words means an understanding, an unbelievable understanding, which is the wisdom, that we say a wisdom of a person. It shines on his face, and with the shine of God's face to us, he gave us a Torah of life, that the Torah is the level of the light of God's face, that we have this, so to speak, pleasure from this ray of God's face that happens for Tzaddik in Gan Eden, and that is the light of the Torah mitzvahs that we learned in this world, and now it shines through it, and we're able to receive it, and we're able to have this pleasure, and for that you need the garments. But the crown that he was given by his mother, which means that which we accomplished down here in this world, that we are able to make a crown for Hashem, which that is the Torah mitzvahs themselves, which are much, much higher than the level of Chachma, that's in the level of, as we said, from Midbar Matana, that it comes from the desert, which the level of Midbar of desert, that is a place that person didn't settle. And therefore it's not in the ability of man to have pleasure from it, in their understanding and in their reasoning whatsoever. In other words, there's a part that we've accomplished that's beyond what we could have pleasure from in the world to come. So those levels, this it says, go out and see. In other words, go out from your garments, because you don't have to wear garments, because the garments don't help, only to receive a understanding, a recognition, sort of a Kabbalah Saga G'dayla, to understand a great understanding and a wondrous one of godliness. But when you want to go to the real level of Hatara, the crown, there your intellect will never reach there, because it's higher than any type of wisdom and understanding in general, and therefore there get out of your garments to be able to look at the level of crown that was made on the day of Matan Torah, as we explained in the Maimer. And look in Zohar, explains about Tze'ena Ure'ena, etc. With that, we finish the Maimer of Tze'ena Ure'ena. Now we'll start another mimer, which is Lahavinin Natam. Now this mimer is actually a long mimer, and we're going to do it in like 2-3 weeks, over 3 weeks, something like that. At the same time, this is actually a biur. It's an explanation on the previous mimer of Tse'ena Ure'ena, even though it starts with a different Dibra Master. Okay, so he says, understand the reasoning. This again is on Chaf Beis, Amid Beis, in the middle of the page. So to understand the reason why arousal from above that comes after an arousal from below is what it says in the verse, that a woman who sows first, then she'll give birth to a male, which is a great level of love in Neshamis of what it says, that I want nothing other in heaven other than an Eibishter, that was to serve God without any reward, which is the greater level of love that happens. So he says, why is it that when you have arousal below that arouses? So it was the Isha, down here, the woman, arouses the husband, meaning the husband meaning the Eibishter above, which then, from that arousal, you get a love. That is a love that is considered Zachar, male, which means one that you're ready to give everything up for the Eibishter. On the other hand, the arousal of love that comes in Neshamis, that comes from a level of arousal from above, on its own, from above to below, without this arousal first, that's what's called the man sows first. And these are pasukim in Tazria based on a Gemara. Isha mazras tchilil zachar, ish mazriat tchilil nekeva. So here, if the man sows first, then we say gives birth to a female. Then it only v'yolda nekeva, which is a lower level of love. As we say, women don't have strong knowledge and connectivity with the concepts that they with different things. Which this is the level of love, as he says here, which is to receive a reward, to have a cleaving to Hashem, and to enjoy the ray of this of the Shekhinah, which is things that ultimately are for self. Okay, so what he says here, meaning here is Nashan Dait and Kalas. What does it mean that they have weak knowledge? That their connectivity with something doesn't allow them, and this is not a statement on all women or anything, but this is the understanding, or just because the Alter Rebbe is touching this statement in the Gemara, is that when you have das, knowledge, which means connectivity to something, there's connectivity to the point that you lose your sense of self, and all you care is about the other thing, and you're totally connected in one, and become fused within that other thing. That's one level of love. And the second one is that yes, you're connected, but it's still about yourself. There's still a sense of self and your own gains that you get from it, and he's saying this is the meaning of Nashan Dait and Kalos, and this is the lower level of love that happens when ish mazriat tchila, and it comes from above rather than from below. And this is what he's going to try to explain. Why is it this way, that when the arousal is from below, you have, in other words, it starts in the feminine, in the isha, then you have a reciprocal arousal from above. You have then a strong love that's developed in you. Mashenkin, on the other hand, when the arousal begins from Hashem, and then we just reciprocate, that we are it's not as strong as a love. Okay, and as we understand here clearly, this is based on the whole Shir Hashirim. The Jewish people are considered women; they're considered, so to speak, the wife of Hashem in this in the Kala, as we've spoken the entire time, etc. Okay, so it explains this all in Pashta Zriya, in the Masal Sais Tasis, in previously in the Likkutei Torah. And also to understand the reason, to explain in the pasuk. I will explain before that in the crown, that to be able to see the crown that his mother has crowned him, which is a level of the crown, you don't need any garments. On the other hand, the great understanding of souls that happens in Gan Eden, which is the reasoning of Torah, which is a level of wisdom, is specifically through garments. So the Chayra should have been the other way around. The crown and the Keser is such a much higher level of them. So, and if so, if with revealing of just a ray you can't do without a garment, so how much more so? In other words, through that you have to understand this ray. That like you can't see a big light without some type of glass in the middle. So how is it that with the crown, it says if you go out of the garments and you could see the crown without the garments, it's a chayra much greater. To understand this, according to what explained in Yitzchayim, in the idea the general descent of the life force and the drawing down of sustenance from the light of the Ein Sof Baruch Hu into the general revolved world, in general, which has two ways of this hashpah. There's two ways of this sustenance coming down. The first one that's coming on a very regular basis all the time, from above to below, without actually any arousal from below either. And this arousal from below, it only comes automatically from above, because the fact that God just wants to be kind. Okay, so in other words, the arousal from below is always happening. It's always being brought down from above, and this is what it says in the verse: the one who amachadish, he renews with his goodness every day, at all times, the actions of creation. And the descent of this sustenance, even though the source of its descent is because of the great kindness and good of God, which comes from the light of the Ein Sof Baruch Hu Mamish, yet it only comes from an external level and not from the inner level of the light. And therefore, it also does not shine, it doesn't get revealed within the creations that there should be any change or any additional level on the level that he was at till now. It's only that it renews the old things, that nothing should be lacking and nothing should be more. So it doesn't really affect it. That's why it means pnimius. The inner meaning behind it is not there. It's lacking. It's almost like a father or a mother who's making sure there's food in the house at all times, but there's no love felt in it. There's no relationship. There's no pnimius. They're just making sure that the house runs the way it's supposed to run. Why? Because they feel obligated. They feel that this is important. They feel a love, a natural love to their family. It's just something that is happening all the time. And look in the Hakdam of Reb Nosson Shapiro in Priyatz Chaim, on Priyatz Chaim. It says that this is what they're shayif, this is what they thirst to. And he says, in this idea, they have no part in the lower worlds at all, but there's another whole added grain that we have in our own avodah, in our work, that we add light until that this is not the amount that's set is not even considerable in comparison to this additional amount that we do, so to speak, through our avodah and Torah mitzvahs. And this is the greater, or the one that's more miyuchas. And this is the second level that he's going to speak here. This of Nosson was brought down, I think, a few pages ago also. He brought down the same piece in a previous mimer, when he spoke about the difference between the two levels of shlichus, when Moshe was a shliach and when Moshe was just speaking on his own. So at the beginning of that piece, he brought down this, the Tzemach Tzedek, I believe, brought down this piece of Nosson Shapiro as well. Yeah, I see it here. It's on Chaf Amid Beis. Chaf Amid Beis, going to Chaf Amid Gimel. Okay, so now he explains that this second level, as the Alter Rebbe now says, the second level is a level of sustenance that comes from above, and it gets drawn down from the inner levels, from much more inner than the first level. And it has in this many greatnesses without limit. Through this additional light, that through it actually changes it. It refines the worlds. It makes them clearer with a great clarity in a comparison to the light and the revelation and this inner hashpah, which comes through specifically what? Through our arousal from below, which is the nullification and the ascension that we have from below to the Eibishter, that through our loving him and nullifying ourselves to him, so that causes that it should shine and be drawn down, this inner hamshacha, that there should be a higher level, deeper level that comes down into the world. He says in these two levels, what says in the Siddur of the Arizal, on the Kvan of Krishma, and it's also in Priyatz Chaim, Shar Krishma, Perek Vav, and Perek Aleph, that there's two types of unifications that happen in Abba ve'ema, meaning in Chachma and Bina. The first one is an inner marriage of Chachma and Bina. And it doesn't happen all the time. That only happens when there's a ascension of the lower waters, meaning the feminine, that arouses itself from Zal Malchus, and that happens through our davening and our mitzvahs, and that arouses a new unification, deeper unification between Chachma and Bina, which that draws down a inner and greater thing through this unification. Then there's a second type of unification between Chachma and Bina, which is an external one, and that is only for the life force of the worlds, which is as much as it's needed for the worlds to exist, and this never stops, because it can't be like without this life force, the world it can't be without. And that happens on its own without any type of arousal from below of Zal Malchus, and it's not through our actions. And that's what it says in Yitzchayim Shar Zivugim, in the Inin of Nesira, in the Shar Nesira, Perek Beis. And look what it says about this also in the Maimer says Asis, and look what it says in the Bir on Pasuk Zechar Sibash Kachay. Okay. And look what it says in the Zohar, Parshas Pinchas, that I'll go up into the dark mountains, and from there, in other words, dark mountains generally refers to Bina, so from there, it comes down the ways of sustenance that come into the world. Now, according to this, we understand this, what we said before, that when a man is the one that sows first, it gives birth to a feminine. Why? Because when the arousal is from the souls down here, it only comes from the arousal as it is above, that it happens automatically. That even though this arousal is from a very high level, because this comes from the fact that God has desires to do kindness, and as it was the beginning of creation, but yet it only comes in an external way, as we said before. It's called an external unity of Chachma and Bina, and therefore, even when it draws down from this, some type of excitement in the Jewish people, it's only a feminine birth. In other words, it's only a small level of love. It's only external. On the other hand, when the arousal from above happens through down here, the souls first are having first having an ascension of their feminine waters, meaning their arousal from below, in a total nullification and in an arousal to above. That is the idea of the woman, that she sows first, and then the arousal from above, it causes and accomplishes that it should be birth of a male, meaning a great deep level of love, because this arousal from below is now coming from an inner level of godliness, and it gets drawn to them an inner level, a revelation, so to speak, that has the love felt and the meaning felt in it, which that causes them to have an inner and a greater level of great love, and something inner in their heart. So let's understand what it says. Senu re'ena, go out and see. Now, what is the difference between Torah and mitzvah is down here is that the Torah is the explanation and the intellect to explain all the details of the mitzvahs, how to do them, how and what to do them. So it comes out that the Torah is the inner level and the mitzvahs are an external level, because the Torah is the reasoning, the meaning, the love, the purpose, so to speak, in the mitzvahs. Yet we see that the body, the mitzvah specifically, it is the essential desire of Hashem, even though that it's only an external level and it's only an action. And the Torah, even though it's the inner level, yet it's only an explanation how and what. In other words, how do you do the mitzvah? So come that the mitzvah is the main thing. And look about this in Parshas Palois, and the Matzah, and therefore, even by a mitzvah itself, with, like, for example, the mitzvah of chalitza, which has in it a statement that has to be said, and there's also an action that has to be done. So it says, so you will do, kacha yasa. So we learn from there that any action is ma'akev. If you didn't do it, the whole chalitza is not good. But if you didn't say the things you were supposed to say, it doesn't hold back the whole. It's still a good thing. In other words, it doesn't nullify the actions. Why? So we see that the actions is this foundation of everything, and therefore we find that the rabbis have exalted, or maflig, in the idea of action even greater. As it says, it doesn't say to lemdeim, those who learn Torah, only those who make, loiseyem, and we said not the medrash is the main thing, only the action, not the learning is the main thing, but the action. So we see the greatness of Africa in action. And yet, because the Torah is the inner level, therefore, because of this level, we find that the rabbis, the Chacham, have also been maflig. They've also spoken in the great terms, in the greatness of Torah as well, even greater than mitzvahs. And we find Yerushalmi Per Kama de Peah, it once says that even all the mitzvahs of Torah are not equal to one thing of Torah. And the truth is, both are true, the Alter Rebbe is saying, the greatness of Torah and the greatness of the Maisa of the mitzvahs. He says, because just as it is in Torah mitzvahs down here, the same way it is above in their source, that we see that Torah is drawn down from the level of the wisdom of Hashem. The supernal wisdom, it says Torah comes from Chachma, that's where it comes out from. On the other hand, mitzvahs, their source in the level of the crown, the supernal crown, as it's known, that therefore there's 613 mitzvahs together with 7 mitzvahs Rabbanim, which they calculate to 620, which is the letters of Keser, which is crown, which has 620 pillars of light. And look in Paradish, Ches Per Gimel, and it's known that the crown is much higher than wisdom. But we say, even though Torah comes from out of wisdom, but that's the only way it gets revealed, and it comes out till this lowest level, in the level of Torah that's revealed to us. But the source and the foundation of Torah is in the inner level of the reasons of Torah, which is the meaning and the ideas, which is their source, is from the inner hidden wisdom, which is of Arach Ampin, which is the level of wisdom that's within the crown, which is called the hidden wisdom, the hidden brain, which is totally concealed and hidden, which is so much higher than the level of wisdom of Atzilus. And that's called the intellect that is hidden from all all ideas, from any images, imagination. And therefore, the inner levels of the reasons of Torah were never revealed today. Only when Mashiach will come, they'll be revealed. And that's what says that then we'll get kissed, the kisses of his face, of his mouth, that will be revealed when Mashiach will come, this level of inner and hidden intellect, which now is hidden, because it's beyond wisdom, we can't understand it. Only then will it be revealed. But this ray, this shine that comes from this level, gets revealed to neshamas in Gan Eden. And that's the learning of Torah of the neshamas they have in Gan Eden, which there is the understanding of these inner levels of reasonings of Torah that comes, so to speak, from the hidden brain, the hidden wisdom of Chachmas Tima, of Archampin, that will come down into the tzaddikim have they pleasure in this revelation in the world to come. And that's why the Chacham say, lucky is the one who comes to here, in other words, the Gan Eden. And his learning is in his hand, in other words, because in Neshama in order. Because it's in creation, and it's a limited being. It cannot have any type of pleasure. And to understand this level of the inner levels, of the reasonings of Torah, which is such a great light, and much higher than Chachmas Tima. Which is the light from the level of Chachmas Tima, which is from the inner level of the crown, which is the wisdom of the crown, without having this learning that's in his hand, meaning that this learning that he learned while he was learning the revealed parts of Torah down here in this world, from this there becomes a garment, with it and through it you're able to have comprehension of these inner levels of Torah. Therefore, the Torah is only called an example, the original example, just like any other example, specifically through it you're able to come to what the example is teaching you about in the lesson and the inner ideas, and without the example, you know what the garment of the example, which is concealing, you would never be able to understand the deeper meaning of the real point. The same way also through Torah, it's an example to these real deeper ideas. And therefore, Shamas and Gan Eden are called the daughters of Tzion, because they are like we said in the previous mimer, they are like the garments. Through the garments that they have from Torah mitzvahs, they're able to receive this. But now on the other hand, mitzvahs, their source is from the skull of the level of Archampin. And that's called the crown of the crown. Not the wisdom of the crown, from which Torah is coming from, but rather the crown of the crown, which is even higher than the hidden level of the brain. That's only the level of Chachma of the crown. And therefore, mitzvahs and maisa are the main thing, and they're the foundation. And therefore, also it has to be this way now, that your actions have to be more than your wisdom, just as above, the skull surrounds the brain. But yet, the level of the skull of Archampin is still an external level of the crown. As we see clearly in our body, that the actual skull is only a bone, and it's an external thing. And on the other hand, the brain, which is in the skull, it is an inner level, meaning it has meaning, it has purpose, etc., in comparison to the skull. As it's known from those who are the doctors, and those who are operative doctors, that in the three compartments of the brain, you have there the inner levels of the brain and intellect, which is Chacham Bin Adas. And therefore, when there's any type of thing that goes wrong physically in the brain, through that there becomes a lessening of the inner levels of your brain, which is being affected. As we have a lot of forgetfulness, it comes from the brain being a little bit getting destroyed a little bit, which in that is dependent on your memory. And this, on the other hand, when it comes to the bone of the skull, it has no revelation of life whatsoever in such a way at all. And therefore, we find that if there's a hole in the actual membrane of the brain, then the animal's treif, even if it's a little tiny hole, and you can't live without it. On the other hand, when you have a broken hole in the skull, it doesn't make you treif, doesn't make the animal treif. The same way it's also above, that the skull of Archampin, which is it's only an external level of the crown, but the brain, they are the inner level of the crown, and a moiches tima, and the hidden wisdom, that's the inner level of the crown. And therefore, from this perspective, that Torah is much higher than the mitzvahs, because as you could say, there's no comparison from a bone to the brain. The brain is a much deeper and meaningful thing. And that's what it means if anybody says that all the mitzvahs of Torah are not equal to even one thing of Torah, because Torah is the inner, meaningful thing. Yet we say the mitzvah is the main thing, the main thing is action, and it's greater, because the actual bone of the skull, even though it's a physical thing and it's external, yet it surrounds the entire brain. And it has to be that, therefore, its source is even higher than the actual brain, because it's what's higher and surrounds it. And it says in Chaim Shachav Beis Perik Vav, and that's what he says, just like the crown is not part of the body of Zer Ampin, it's only something that surrounds above it. And without it, the same way it's also in this lower man, that the crown that he has, it surrounds him from outside of him. The same way, in the lower level of man, that his crown is a spiritual light that surrounds upon him, and it's not revealed to all. But the external level, which spreads down here into this world, is revealed down here, and that is the skull that surrounds the intellect of the man himself, ad kan l'shayna. So it comes out that the skull of a person, even though by itself is only an external level, and the intellect is the inner level, and therefore within it is the main revelation of the life force of man. Yet the external level of the supernal makif, of the surrounding light that there is in the person, which that surrounding spiritual life is much, much higher than the inner levels of the intellect, as it's known, which we know the inner lights have no comparison to the lights that are surrounding. So this external level of the makif, that is where you have this level of the skull, and therefore because of this, it ends up also being surrounding on the brain, because it's coming from the level, in other words, the source is not from inner levels, it's from the makif of the makif, and therefore, even though it's an external level, but it's from a higher level. But because it itself is only the external level of that surrounding light, therefore, the intellect that's being revealed through it, therefore the intellect, which with the inner light is being revealed to, which is Chabad in a revealed way, they're in a way greater than the skull. Even though that in its source, it's much higher, this source of the light of the makif that doesn't get revealed and doesn't get seen and recognized at all. On the other hand, the light of the intellect, which is revealed and gets seen, which is the bina and das, which we see here. So to understand from all this, that there's a greatness in the intellect that there isn't in the skull. That is, that it's an inner level. On the other hand, the skull is only external. And then there's also there's also something great in the skull, which is higher than the intellect, because it's from the external levels of the surrounding light, spiritual surrounding light, that's much, much higher and beyond anything that is in the inner levels of the intellect. And from this all we could understand that the way it is above, in the source of Torah mitzvahs, and a Torah that comes from the Chachma of Atzilis, and that's where it comes from, and its source is from the Chachma of the Keser, that is the inner level. On the other hand, the mitzvahs, which they are from the skull, which is only the external level of the crown, and is that which surrounds and engulfs the entire intellect, which because it is wisdom from the inner level, and the skull is from the external level, is therefore because of this level the Rabbi spoke in the greatness of Torah, how it's even greater than mitzvahs. Yet the main thing is the action, because the skull is the external level of the makif, the spiritual makif, which is much, much higher than the inner levels of the intellect, and therefore that's higher. Okay. And so you could look also, he says in the Ramaz over here, he says there that even the level of Keser, of Arich, is considered still from the level of the world of Ein Sof, like every level of crown, that it's always connected and it's called by what is higher than it. On the other hand, the main level of Atzilus only starts from the inner level of the Moyach, Stima, which is Chachma Da'arech, etc. And look, so it comes out that the skull, which is external level of the crown of Arech, that is the crown of the crown. And therefore it's higher because of this reason than the wisdom of the crown, even though the wisdom of the crown is the level of Pimius. And look, in other words, something that's beyond being able to reveal. And look also explains in the Martin of Vush, and therefore the Galgalta, the actual skull, is also a level of makif on the hidden wisdom, and it's also a makif on the hidden wisdom, because it is a surrounding light above, so it ends up being surrounding down here below as well. And we'll continue the Maimer Eskimel next week.